Hello and welcome. My name is Marta Bazouk. I'm the Executive Director of the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium. We are a project of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Alberta. And we're very happy to co-sponsor this event today with the Department of History, Classics, and Religion at the University of Alberta. I'd like to say just a few words about HREC before we move on to our much anticipated lecture today. HREC was founded in 2014 with generous funding from the Temerty Foundation. Our mandate is to promote research and education about the Holodomor, the famine of 1932-1933 in Soviet Ukraine. I'd just like to mention a little about the context of our work, that the Soviet authorities at the time of the events denied that there was a famine, and for more than 50 years afterwards, their successors would continue to deny that the famine had taken place. It took the fall of the USSR for researchers to gain access to the archives that would confirm what witnesses and survivors had told us, that there had been a famine killing millions in Ukraine that was the direct result of intentional Soviet policies. I mention all this right now because HREC, we're always looking for ways, meaningful ways to support research about the Holodomor, because there is this gap from the time of the events till the time it was possible to research it. We've had conferences, we give research grants, we have published many works at this point. We look for all kinds of ways to support research and education of the Holodomor. And about 2 years ago, we thought what we haven't done yet and what is very much needed is support to academics to engage in longer term projects that can result in a monograph length work on a Holodomor related topic. And that is why we initiated the Temerty Postdoctoral Fellowship in Holodomor Studies. And we are very pleased that Eduard Baidaus is with us today to talk to us about his cutting edge research in a very under-examined area that seems to be very fruitful for providing more context and another perspective on the famine. I will be giving the floor over to Professor Heather Coleman, a historian specializing in Ukrainian and Russian history. But first, I would like to thank again the Temerty Foundation for their ongoing support of the Holodomor Research Education Consortium, and also to mention that we are very grateful to a newer donor, the Bazouki family, who have allowed us to expand our programs. And also, if you'd like to find out any more about our research projects or our programs in the area of education, and they include development of curriculum materials, teacher training, and other outreach initiatives, excuse me, please check our website. It's an easy one to remember, holodomor.ca. With that, I would like to give the floor to Heather Coleman.
Thanks very much, Marta. It's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Eduard Baidaus, the Temerty Postdoctoral Fellow at HREC. And we've had I'm happy to introduce him both as a member of CIUS and as the Associate Chair Grad Studies in the Department of History, Classics, and Religion, since Eduard is one of our graduates. Originally from Moldova, Dr. Baidaus started his career as an early modernist, completing a doctoral degree there at the Institute of History of the Academy of Sciences of Moldova in 1995. He taught at the Ioan Creanga State Pedagogical University in Chișinău and worked as a senior researcher at the Institute of History of the Academy of Sciences of Moldova. He also authored several books before moving to Canada, where he pursued doctoral studies here at the University of Alberta, and he holds a PhD from the University of Alberta, 2017. A revised version of his thesis, titled Unsettled Nation, State Building, Separatism, and Identity in Post-Soviet Moldova, is under contract with Ibidem Press in Germany. He's taught at Armstrong Atlantic State University in Georgia, at the University of Alberta, at the University of Lethbridge Edmonton campus, at Lakeland College, and Red Deer Polytechnic. Dr. Baidaus's postdoctoral project at HREC is titled The Holodomor in the Ukrainian-Romanian Border Region, an examination of Romania's response to the Ukrainian famine. And as Marta said, this really helps us to expand the understanding of the international impact of the Holodomor. The project aims to study the specifics of collectivization, grain requisition, and famine in the regions of Soviet Ukraine located in proximity to the Soviet-Romanian border, and the fate of Soviet refugees in Romania. Today's presentation comes out of that research, and his subject today is The River That Killed and Saved, Crossing the Dnister into Romania during the era of collectivization and famine in Ukraine. Before I turn over the microphone to Dr. Baidaus, I just want to make a small technical point. We're in a webinar mode today, and so we will, I would like to ask our audience members, if you have questions, to please put them in the Q&A, which you'll see in the bottom center of your screen. And I will be checking the Q&A, and I will moderate the questions after Dr. Baidaus's presentation. Feel free to put your questions in as he's speaking, whenever they come to you, or while we're having the conversation at the end. Now, without further ado, Eduard, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I do really appreciate for this opportunity to make this presentation on a very important subject, and indeed not fully enough researched. And I hope that I'll be among those who will work on this subject in the present and in the future. So, and I am thankful for HREC for this postdoctoral fellowship, which indeed is very helpful, and it's very supportive for doing research on Holodomor, on Stalinism in Ukraine, and in connection with the neighbors of the USSR at the times, which was Royal Romania. So thank you. I'm moving to my presentation. I will share the screen and we'll move on. I hope everyone can see what I do see. Am I right? Hello?
Yes, we can see it. Eduard, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, because I wasn't sure. I may be coughing because I have an allergy. It's springtime. I am teaching and I'm doing research for more than 30 years, but every single time when I have a presentation or a lecture, I feel some emotions. So I hope I will control myself and I will do a good job, as usually I'm trying to do. So it's a presentation about people in Soviet Ukraine, in Soviet Union, who during the famine tried to escape from USSR into Romania. But I was thinking that after Russian Revolution, during Civil War, and after Civil War, hundreds of thousands of people from former Russian Empire left the former Russian Empire. Nobility, intelligentsia, aristocrats, military, ordinary people. Then in the 1920s, first famine. And it's understandable. There was a change of regime and the people was afraid to live in fear and under new sort of dictatorship. But my presentation today, it's about those people, first of all, peasants who in 1917 received the land from Vladimir Lenin, and about 10 years later, they were close to lose everything. And in late 1920s, early 1930s, people in Ukraine, in those regions bordering with interwar Poland and Romania, but not only, tried to leave the country just to escape themselves from those atrocities which were committed by the Soviet government. I'm not sure if I can use the laser here, but you can see this map. And by the way, I'll have a number of maps and images. Some of them will be commented by me, others I will leave without comments. But if you feel you have any questions related to an image or a map or to the content, please feel free and ask me at the end of the presentation. I'll be very happy to answer. So this map shows the Dniester River, or Dnister in Ukrainian, or Dnister in Romanian language. So it starts in Galicia and it moves through all Western Ukraine down to the Black Sea. So this river, after 1918, was for Romanian state an international border between Romania and Soviet Union. For the Soviets, this river wasn't a border, was a demarcation line, because according to Soviet propaganda and geopolitical goals, they wanted the Kremlin to take back Bessarabia, which for more than 100 years was a Russian province known as Bessarabia, which in fact was eastern part of Moldavian Principality, taken by Russian Empire in 1812 from Moldova. I'm trying to move the slide. Okay. Every single family has a story to tell. And I was thinking, how can I connect the topic of those peasants in Ukraine with those peasants in Bessarabia, which was part of Romania after 1918 until 1940, when the region was taken by the Soviets. You can see here two pictures, photos of my grandparents on my father's line. On the left, mid-30s, it's a photo of a peasant family, my grandfather, Eduard Baidaus, and his wife, my grandmother, Sofia Baidaus. They were, according to Soviet standards, kulaks, because they had 16 hectares of land, which was a lot. So what happened to them? They got married in 1932. And by mid of 1930s or late 1940s, my great-grandfather told my grandfather, Tuadir, when Russians come, they will take everything from us. And my great-grandfather probably knew well what was happening in Soviet Union because he was working in a local village administration. He was a well-educated man. Leostin Prodan was his name. Now, on the right side, you see another photo. It says April 13, 1958, Orthodox Easter. Again, them, many years later, with my grandmother over there and my uncles, my aunts. What is the difference? Well, 10 years before 1958, this family, they still had 16 hectares of land. Next year, they gave up everything to the kolkhoz. Otherwise, they will be sent to Siberia. 1958, 1930s, and not to forget 1946, 47, which was a man-made famine in Soviet Moldavia and in Soviet Ukraine again. In my presentation, I will make some other references to Bessarabians and the way they try to help those refugees from Soviet Ukraine into Romania, and what happened to them for doing such a noble thing. The outline, this is the outline and the questions I'll be discussing today, introduction and the historical context. Question number 2, I'll be referring to why people decided to leave the so-called Soviet paradise. 3, escaping to Romania. 4, already in Romania, and I will end my presentation with some preliminary conclusion and a session of question and answer. This is the map of Soviet Ukraine in the 1930s. I'm not sure if you can see the arrow. I will try to use it. So over here, it's a Moldavian Autonomous Republic, the focus of this presentation, but not only this area, since the border, the Dniester River, wasn't only shared between this Moldavian Autonomous Republic within Soviet Ukraine, but by other regions like Odessa region or Vinnytsia region as well. So just to give you a clue in terms of geography, Poland here and Romania here and Ukraine, which was surrendered in the east by Soviet Russia and by Soviet Belarus. So introduction and the historical context. Well, this presentation focuses on Stalin's collectivization in Moldavian Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic within Soviet Ukraine, on peasants' reaction to these policies, reasons for leaving Soviet Ukraine, or better say Soviet Union, the escapees, and the Romanian response of politicians, of ordinary people, and various organizations to refugees and Holodomor. Well, Joseph Stalin, foundations of Leninism. Of course, well, collectivization wasn't Lenin's idea. In fact, it was Stalin's, even though Stalin claimed to be a follower of Vladimir Lenin. It is important in order to understand the real situation, which was proper for 1920s and 1930s, to understand that the relations between Soviet Union and Romania, what Romania was after Great War and what Soviet Union was after Great War, and why these countries didn't have diplomatic relations. So you have a common border, but you don't have diplomatic relations. Between 1918 and 1940, Romania was known as a Greater Romania. And the reason was greater because it succeeded in expanding its area after World War I ended. Bessarabia, former Russian province, became part of Romania. Transylvania, Krishana, Banat belonged to Bukovina, that belonged to Austro-Hungarian state, became Romanian as well. So even though after the war, Romania as the Western world went through domestic challenges, it is known about the roaring 20s, about 30s, Great Depression. However, in addition to political problems, to economic problems, and international conflicts, we may say with Soviet Union, of course, there was a problem of ethnic minorities. And one of these problems of ethnic minorities was the way how Romania perceived the Romanian-speaking Moldavians of Bessarabia as Romanians, and how Soviet Union identifying them as only Moldavians, which were similar, identical to those Romanian-speaking Moldavians from Soviet Ukraine or from Soviet Union. In terms of international challenges, Hungary wasn't, of course, happy with the loss of Transylvania. Soviet Union wasn't happy with the loss of Bessarabia, and also from Soviet Union came a new threat, communism. And we know about Red Scare, Red menaces of 1950s, but also there was such a feeling in 1930s and even 1920s. About Russia, well, probably the situation of Russia is much better known by everyone because of the history of Soviet Union. You can see here a map. This pink color demonstrates those territories which were lost by former Russian Empire to other states. And of course, it was a time when Brest-Litovsk Treaty was signed in 1918, the Treaty of Versailles, where Russia, Soviet Russia at the time wasn't part of, a Treaty of Riga, when Ukraine and Belarus was divided between Poland and Soviet Union. Post-war Russia, Soviet Russia first and the Soviet Union was also challenged by civil war, you know, about chaos, economic crisis, we know about war communist policies, NEP. It was a time of starvation and famine when millions died. In terms of international relation, the Bolsheviks were probably concerned of a foreign intervention, having the experience of civil war. And also this country was isolated until 1934. So fear of war, of new intervention, and Soviet Union was portrayed by the Bolsheviks to its own people as a citadel, as a fortress, always under threat of the Western world. So what about Greater Romania and Soviet Union? I have a feeling that when I show a slide, the viewer, first of all, looks at the image. This is what I will do probably. So here we can see a map of Romania, interwar Romania, and on the right side in the east, there is a Moldavian Autonomous Republic and Soviet Union, Soviet Ukraine. So what happened between these two countries? They were allies in World War I, but then World War I ended. Before that, Bolsheviks came to power. There were differences between political regime in Romania and in Russia, which were incompatible for them. There was a problem after Great War, the problem of national treasure, Romanian one, which in 1916 was evacuated from Romania to Russia, still Imperial Russia, because Germany was taking over Romania. Then another problem, a challenge, the problem of Bessarabia, which I mentioned, and not less, but also important ideologies. Bolshevik communist ideology. And by the way, Bessarabia being part of the Russian Empire for more than 100 years was also influenced by a revolutionary movement of old Russia, so to say. So between 1918 and 1934, there were no diplomatic relations between these two countries. It was Lenin's government who broke off relations with Bucharest because, in the view of the Soviets, Romania occupied Bessarabia by force. So there was a concept of border and the concept of demarcation line, which I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. The Dniester River was just a temporary demarcation line to the Soviets. And indeed, in 1940, Dniester wasn't anymore a border line, a demarcation line. It became just a river, and the Prut River became a new international border. Nonetheless, even though you don't have diplomatic relations with your neighbor, there are some problems to be solved and incidents to be fixed. People were running from one country to another country on both sides. So to make myself clear, there were people who were leaving Romania, Bessarabia, for Soviet Union. Well, less and for different reasons, but still. And there was a Soviet-Romanian mixed boundary commission, which was working with all these problems of refugees. Now, this little Moldavian Autonomous Republic was created in the territory of southwestern Ukraine in 1924 with a geopolitical goal. Even though there were about 30% of Romanian-speaking Moldavians and almost half Ukrainians, that wasn't important for politicians in Moscow. They needed the so-called Moldavian Piedmont, which in the future they believed would attract Bessarabians, and they will take over Bessarabia, claiming that Bessarabia is populated by Moldovans and they have to be liberated and to join their brothers in Soviet Union. Question number two, leaving the Soviet paradise. I'm reading the subtitles because sometimes people just listening and don't see the screen maybe. So what we can see here, it's known that Imperial Russia was an agrarian country with millions of illiterate peasantry. In 1917, when Bolsheviks came to power, it was also thanks to their propaganda. Land to peasants, because the liberation from serfdom of 1861 was helpful, but it wasn't help in terms of getting more land by peasantry. And even the Stolypin's reform in early 1900s didn't solve the problem. So peasants in Russian Empire, they wanted land. And Bolsheviks, they promised land to peasants, factory to workers, and peace to peoples. So no war, the so-called imperialistic war. At the same time, after 1917, there were new novelties, so to say. No to private property, no to exploitation, no landlords, no capitalists, no nothing related to the old world until the NEP for a while. And what happened next? Well, after a decade of chaos, war, famine, when Stalin became the only ruler of Soviet Union and he came up with these ideas of industrialization and collectivization, the goal was to build a socialist countryside. And I say here, for the Soviet state. We may say in the Soviet state, but probably it's for the Soviet state. It wasn't for people. And here you can see two propaganda items. On the left, a propaganda poster which reads towards collectivization, future, a bright future, happy people, a transformed countryside, a socialist one with tractors, with happy people and so on. On the left, on the right side, we see a screenshot which I made from a journal published in 1933, which from a journal called Red Bessarabia, which shows a peasant in a Moldavian Autonomous Republic with two types of sacks. In the right side, it says the year of 1932, 2 kilograms. On the left side, in the bottom here, it says the year of 1933, 8 kilograms. So the text reads and says that this peasant in 1932, he received only 2 kilograms per work day in the kolkhoz. But next year, because the year was much better, more harvest, he got 8 kilograms of grain per labor day. Now think how many labor days this person and others had working in collective farms and how grain they were entitled to receive, according to this article. That was, of course, propaganda, especially when we know what was happening in 1931, 32, and even 33, with a grain requisition, with famine, starvation, and so on. So building a socialist country for the Soviet state, why? They live the paradise. If everything was so nice in Soviet Union. You can see this photo which shows people or activists of the village and those 25,000 of workers who were sent in the countryside to create kolkhoz. They were grabbing the grain from people. So what happened actually in all Soviet Union, including Soviet Ukraine and including in that small Moldavian Piedmont, forced grain requisition, and the state enforced low prices. You cannot sell the grain, your product, at the price of the market price. There wasn't a market price. It was a pure plundering of the peasantry. Again, why to live? Collectivization, decollectization, and taxation, which meant confiscation of land, of livestock, of tools, of everything. You had to give up. Otherwise, you'll be blamed of being labeled as a kulak. You can lose everything, your house, your property. You can lose your life, being resettled, deported, or even shot. So it was a time of annihilation of rich farmers. Those, we may say, the bone of agrarian economic system in the countryside. Then taxes and even random cash collection, which I found in some documents, imposed on peasants. Other factors which made people to leave for Romania or for Poland in the 1930s, food shortage and the coming up famine. Also punitive policies and despair and fear. People didn't see themselves, safe and didn't see a future. Now the question, what did the Soviet authorities do and say? I have another subtitle here which says threat, dehumanization, intimidation, repressions, executions, and deportation. That was happening to people in USSR, in those parts of Ukraine, in Ukraine, Soviet Ukraine, and autonomous Moldavia. This propaganda poster says we should get rid of the kulak. And kulak were nothing but well-to-do peasants, hard-working people. And if you are a kulak, so to say, or even a serednyak, a middle-class peasant, you still were under the threat. So documents provide new information and facts the way how Soviet authorities, local authorities, were threatening people in the countryside. Look, quotation, Voronovich was arrested. Bogopolsky is on trial. Now, Dmitriev is taken to Kharkiv. You too will be arrested. When you see Voronovich, Bogopolsky, or Dmitriev, it's also about ethnic composition of those who are threatened. Another example, reap everyone, not a single Serednyak, well-to-do peasant, is to be left alone. And even more, when people was left without any bread and any hope to survive, local authorities in one of the villages would tell them, you know what, go to find bread in Bessarabia if you want to feed your children. So, and if you live on the border with Romania, on the border with Bessarabia, and there's just a river to cross, and you see there is no way to survive in this country, you'll take the risk and live with your children, family members, and even friends. What else documents say? Well, this is the photo of Stanislav Kosor, one of the elite leaders in Soviet Ukraine. So local authorities in Moldavian autonomy in 1932, in March, they were asking for 2.5 tons of grain and 4 tons of flour. It was a problem. Even more, they informed that only in that little polity, ASSR, 15,000 households starved, which was a lot. They ended their telegram with a paragraph which actually they deleted. They changed their minds. They didn't want Kosor to read it for some reason. And it was saying that we need flour and grain to eliminate immigration tendencies and improve the political and moral state in the village. Eliminate immigration tendencies. That was a specific of those Ukrainian rayons or even oblast regions bordering with a foreign enemy state, either Poland or Romania. Also, in documents you can read people addressing to authorities, literally, give us bread because we die from starvation. And you see this poster which reads "Hliba" or "Penny." I have it down in Romanian Cyrillic, penny or bread. And a Soviet border guard who was put there to preserve the integrity of Soviet borders, or in this case, of Soviet demarcation line. So what happened in villages and also in cities and towns? Because my research is focused not only on countryside, but also on urbanites, I have here another example. Documents referring to Balta city, which was the first capital of Soviet Moldavia. Students in a pedagogical school boycotted classes because they haven't seen bread for a week. The same thing was told by the firefighters to their superiors. They declined duties because they haven't eaten, they haven't seen any bread. Even workers were dismissed for no bread to feed them. What about villages? No motivation to work. And in fact, it's probably time to mention here that by organizing those kolkhozes or collective farms, Soviet authorities, they just destroyed the traditional fabric of village. And they destroyed the motivation of peasants to work the land, because it wasn't mine anymore. It was the collective. So it's a different attitude. Villagers, they had no strength to resist either politically or physically. You cannot fight when you starve, even though there were indeed disparate actions to resist, to oppose, and fight to some extent collectivization and famine. But in fact, there wasn't a hope, especially in 1932, 1933, during the Holodomor in Soviet Ukraine. Now, what did the people say and feel? This photo, it is not related to Soviet autonomous Moldavia. It's a photo which fits the context of the famine, of the Holodomor. So what people said, what documents say? They would say, it makes no sense for us where we die, here in our villages or on the Dniester River. But if they don't kill us, we will survive all in Bessarabia, then part of Romania. Another example, after they took most of the harvest, soon after they target not only the cereals, but also imposed contributions in chicken, eggs, butter, and milk. The village was doomed to starve. That was told by an old man in 1933 when he managed to escape to Romania. Let's talk about peasants' reactions and responses in this Moldavian Autonomous Republic. You can see here another map, a political administrative map of Ukraine. Here is a Moldavian Autonomous Republic. You can see Odessa region, Dniester region, and Bessarabia, which is made theoretically part of Soviet Union. It's hard only to imagine what would happen to those people in Bessarabia, regardless of their ethnicity, Romanians, Ukrainians, Russians, Bulgarians, Gagauz, if they were part of Soviet Union, starting with 1918 or 1922. So what did peasants do? What was their reaction and response? As elsewhere, they tried to boycott collective farms membership. Some would enter and then will leave. But if you were a member of the collective farm and you leave afterwards, you are immediately an enemy of the state. They also destroyed agricultural inventory. They killed livestock. They left their villages. And there was a process of internal migration to other Soviet towns and cities within Ukraine and beyond the borders of Ukraine. But we know that the mobility was reduced by Stalinist policies. Nobody was left to leave a village or even a town. Also, illegal immigration to Romania, since we speak about Romania, but also to Poland, because as they thought, the life was better and safer. And probably it was when you begin to compare the life in Soviet Union with the life in a capitalist country, which were those times Poland and Romania. Question number 3, escaping to Romania. Well, this is a screenshot from a journal published by the Soviet authorities called Red Bessarabia. Red because the communism. And it's shown here as being taken by the Romania, and the geopolitical goal of Soviet government was to take back this territory and spread Bolshevism into Balkans through Bessarabia, through Romania. So Soviet Union portrayed Romania in the darkest possible colors, because Romania was an enemy state. It was a state with a monarchy. It was governed by reactionaries. They occupied Bessarabia and they were fascists. In their opinion, peasants and the working class, first of all, of Romania, were growing from poverty, unemployment, starvation, national oppression under the heel of boyars, which were landlords, capitalists, and fascists. So you see, it's 1932, and they speak of fascists, eventually Italian fascists, because because Germany at the time wasn't still a Nazi state. What about interwar Romania itself? Look at these faces. It's from a journal published in 1933, People Living for Summer Vacation for Black Sea. I understand, one may say, but there were peasants, there were workers who had a hard life over there at the same time. Yes, they did have a hard life too, but it wasn't to compare with the fear and the approach which the Soviet government had towards a peasantry and workers in Soviet Union. Just some other examples about contrasting worlds. In 1932, in Chernovitz, today Chernivtsi, Ukraine, there was a Miss Bukovina beauty pageant contest. And that city was just a few miles away from Soviet Ukraine, where people were literally starving and dying and eating each other, cannibalism. Romania was under the threat of Bolshevism because of Soviet agitators and provocations in Bessarabia and on the border. Romanian authorities did not forget and should consider two anti-Romanian uprisings, both in Bessarabia, one in 1919 at Hotin in the north of Bessarabia, and the second one in Tatarbunar in the south of Bessarabia in 1924. So Romania had also problems as the rest of the world. But again, to make it clear, there were problems with the minorities, with human rights, but not to those extent of the problems which existed in Soviet Union. And one of the examples of social conflicts, economic conflict, problems is the case of the so-called Grivița railway strike, which took place in Bucharest 1933. So it was a different world with its own problems, but it was a world free of communist ideology. Who attempt to escape? This is the map of Soviet Union in 1930s. And of course, when we speak about people who attempt, we should consider geography, social status, occupation of people, and their ethnic composition. Of course, first of all, those who moved to Romania were people of Soviet Ukraine. And first of all, from the Moldavian Autonomous Republic, but also from Odessa and Vinica region. But there are other people, as documents show, trying to reach Romania as far as from Volga-German Autonomous Republic. Right here, if you see my arrow, I show it here. And there was a case, a teacher, David Meyer, if I do pronounce his last name correctly, he was caught by Soviet border guards, and under interrogation, he revealed that he actually wanted to kill Joseph Stalin because Stalin was guilty, in his opinion, for the famine, for starvation, and for the lack of food in the country. Unfortunately, the documents I used so far didn't say what happened to this person and others, but it's either one, shot on the spot or afterwards, or sent to Gulag where they died, or to some maybe survived. As for the status and occupation, usually peasants, but also poor peasants, well-off peasants, poor peasants, and collective farmers if we talk about countryside. But even people from cities and towns trying to live for Romania or Poland. In terms of ethnic composition, I have here a number of examples of the last names. There were Moldavians, Ukrainians, and Russians like Turkan, Barbe, Khetereu, being Romanian-speaking Moldavians, Rybalko, Kristenko, Ivanchenko, being eventually Ukrainians, and such as Zakharov, Tomov, and Ignatiev, being Russians. Now escaping. Here is the Dniester River. It's a photo of the Dniester River from the north of today Moldova and Ukraine. On the left side is the city of Soroki. On the right side in Ukraine is a village. And you can imagine what people would do only to escape. It's a river. And you have a number of limited opportunities to escape. What was important? First of all, as I said, landscape was a river. Important were seasons and the weather. People try to escape in the winter time because of the frozen ice or frozen river and ice, or in the summertime, better say, rowing or swimming. But you must be a good swimmer and a good runner if it's about winter or swimmer about summertime. There were specific time and occasions where people trying to leave Stalin's so-called paradise, late evening and at the nights, because it's dark. And also, as one of the documents I found indicates that people even considered to leave probably in specific Soviet holidays. Well, Red Army was a sort of holiday, February 23rd of 1932, and there was a massacre of more than 40 people died when they tried to cross the border in that night, and I'll speak about this example a bit later. Means of escape, again by season. Winter, afoot, on sleighs or carts. Summer, rafts, boats, soccer balls. And you see here a poster of a soccer game in June 1937 in Soviet Union. The reason I have this image, I was looking for an image which will show a soccer ball in those times. Over here, the man holds it. So 3 fellows from Moscow, they wanted to cross the border to swim through the Dnister River by using 3 soccer balls. They were caught. They were detained and caught. And again, documents don't say yet what happened to them. But there is another example. I mean, if they came from Moscow, there wasn't a famine in Moscow in those times. And it's interesting that these fellows, they wanted to leave Soviet Union just for tourism reason. So you can imagine some people were dying from starvation and in despair wanted to leave the country. Others from Moscow, like these 2 fellows, they wanted just to travel. Anyways, what was the risk? Anyone, anytime could be caught or get a so-called red bullet. In the winter, or in the summer, and also there was a problem. There was the Dniester River is a fast-flowing water. In the winter or springtime, it's about ice melting and melty ground. Another example: a father of 5 children, a man, he crossed the river in a large oblong box, which probably looked like a coffin, but he managed to make it, and he survived with 5 children from crossing the river. Of course, the borders, international borders, or you may call them border lines or a demarcation line, are very important for every single state. But especially with such a state which was Soviet Union, always considered to under attack of the capitalist world. So what were the Soviet preventive and repressive measures undertaken by OGPU and later by NKVD? You can see here a photo of some NKVD or OGPU officers. Those who tried to leave the country were arrested and temporarily detained. They had to go through a political prophylaxis. They were explained that it's not good, you break the law, and over there are enemies, you will die. There were ambushes created by the border guards. People who tried to leave, they were summoned to stop and surrender. And if not, then you get a bullet. For instance, I have 2 examples here in the village of Speya, Grigoriopol Rayon, right on the border, pardon me, demarcation line on the Dniester River. 10 heads of the families were suspected of illegal immigration, and they were arrested. Or another case, about 139 adults and many children were left to go home only after officials talked to them, explaining that what they planned to do was wrong. Interesting if they survived afterwards. Another map which shows an enlarged picture of the Moldavian Autonomous Republic and other regions which of Ukraine which bordered with Romania. So what were Soviet repressive and punitive measures? Well, it's clear: imprisonment, deportation, and I said murder, but officially it was execution. An example: Dialakau village, Grigoriopol Rayon, right here in the south. 26 people disregarded the border guards' order to stop, and they were shot. Another example, in Dubasar, Kochiar village, up to the north, 3 people tried to escape. 2 were killed and 1 detained. However, one of the most horrible atrocity and infamous, of course, and well-known in Romania and abroad was the Holodomor massacre, which took place February 23rd, Red Army Day, 1932. Then, here in the south, in the area of Holiness forest, some 60 people attempt to escape, but there was an ambush and they were machine gunned. About 40 people died. The rest, some of them being wounded, managed to make it to Romanian border. So the Holiness Massacre, and what did Romanian print media report about this? You can see dozens, citation, quotation, dozens and hundreds of refugees cannot save themselves from Soviet bullets. One can see on the Dnister River the corpse of men, women, and frozen children. And this is a photo which portrayed those border guards with the machine gun Maximka, used eventually by the GPU and later by NKVD border guards to stop people from leaving the country. And if the country was so good and everything was so nice over there with human rights as the Soviet Union pretended, why people would leave? We know why now. And even at that time, people, of course, knew about that. So Romania, what was the official reaction and responses? But first, look at this photo. It shows a Romanian patrol and a woman nearby Dniester River discovering a person lying down. I'm not sure if that was just a body, a dead person, or still alive, but just one example of how they were found in the morning. So Bucharest, which was the capital of interwar Romania and known in those times a little Paris, did not take any specific actions addressing the murders on the Dniester River and the Holodomor per se. Well, generally, Romanian leadership remained silent. Well, as in fact, the rest of the Western world was. One of the Romanian scholars in his publications, his name is Vadim Guzun, he considers that Romanian authorities in those times wanted to be prudent, preserve strict neutrality, and not to irritate the big neighbor in the east, which was Stalin's USSR. And eventually the same approach was in Poland. It is known that there is a large community of Ukrainians in Romania in interwar times. And they, of course, try and help their people, the Ukrainians who were coming from Soviet Ukraine, but not only Ukrainians. So one of those organizations was the Ukrainian Society Prosvita, and also the Society of Ukrainian Studies. But in addition, they were public figures. In Romania, for instance, was a member of parliament named Denis Mayer Mihalski, who alerted the large public and elites about Soviet famine. But he was not adequately heard. Another example, since I'm speaking about Romania and I mentioned sometimes Poland, Milena Rudnicka in Poland did the same. She was telling that Ukrainians were threatened with deportation or even were deported, those who escaped from Soviet Union during the famine. The question is why? And I will try to respond to this question by the end of my presentation. In Romania, once you manage to cross the border illegally, of course, you'll get help. So refugees from Soviet Ukraine were provided with food, medical care, shelter, employment, schooling for children, clothing. And this photo, one may say, it's a propaganda poster, it's a propaganda image. Well, it might be a propaganda, but at the same time, it reveals the reality. It did happen, it was as such. And people needed to know what was happening to those people who managed to cross the border and survive in Romania. So who helped and how? Church or churches, banks, politicians, even ordinary citizens, various cultural organizations or associations, Romanian or Romanian Ukrainian. When I say Romanian Ukrainian, I mean Ukrainians from Romania. And I have an example. Romanian senators in 1932 offered a sum of 120,000 lei from their per diem to help the refugees. And this amount of money is equal to $720 US in 1930s, which was the price of, well, a Ford car costed about $500. Someone say it's not too much, but it was something, and they were not the only ones to help the refugees from Ukraine during the Holodomor. I was born in Moldova. Well, this is the way people in Moldova call Moldova. They didn't call it Bessarabia. It's different a bit. But anyways, I was born in Moldova and will die there. It was said by a person called named Simeon Bacho. And it's a photo of 1959 in Sosnovskaya, Irkutsk, where he was living with his family. What was the reason? He, and many others, of course, he was originally from Marian village, Tighina district, in Bessarabia, Romania. And he, according to Soviet standards, was a kulak. 6 hectares of land or 15 acres of land. During the 1930s, he provided work and shelter to a family from Moldavian Autonomous Republic from Soviet Ukraine in 1932-33, because he had a lot of land and he needed people to work to help him, and that was good for both sides. But when the Soviets took over Bessarabia in 1940, first his father was arrested and disappeared, but later, in late 1940s, he himself was arrested, he was dekulakized and deported with the whole family, 4 children in Irkutsk, Siberia, and he returned home only in early 1960s. But this is just one example, and I'm thankful to Dr. Sergiu Baciu, who is the grandson of this person, for sharing with me this information. Now, refugees under the threat of deportation. This image, this photo shows how Romanian authorities saw the threat coming from the east, from Soviet Union, trying to grab Bessarabia, first of all. So generally, who and why was sent to back to the SSR via mixed Soviet-Romanian boundary commission? Generally, individuals who were suspected by Romanians as being Bolshevik agents and spies, and they indeed were such persons. Also, persons of no interest to Romanian intelligence service. There was a case of a young fellow called Karpov, who it was decided to be sent back because he had no relatives in Romania. That was stating the stenogram, the document. He wasn't returned to Soviet Union because he ran away from the Romanian authorities and he disappeared somewhere. Also, people who had no relatives, as I said, in the country. Now the deportation to Soviet Union. There are some indications that not all Jews and Ukrainians were given refugee status in Romania, and they were turned back to the Soviets. That was a catastrophe. So why Jews? Well, look at this map. This map shows the Jewish population in Romania, and you can see Bessarabia in the east here. Darker color means more Jewish population. So why the Jews? They were seen as spies and Bolshevik agents. There was a time of rise of anti-Semitism in Romania, as it was in Hungary, in Poland, in Germany. And also there was a large Jewish community in Bessarabia from the times of Imperial Russia. And I have here a number of examples. Chisinau, which was the capital of Bessarabian province, had more than 40% of Jewish population. Belz in the north, 46. 3 other examples, Rezina, Hotin, and Otac, they were on the border. They were located, these cities are localities on the border with Soviet Union on the Dniester River. 39, 37, almost 80%. So they didn't want to accept Jews for anti-Semitism and for the threat of having more Bolshevik propaganda on Romanian soil. Now, what about Ukrainians? This is a working hypothesis. Geopolitically, Bucharest or Romanian authorities were probably interested in increasing the number of Soviet Romanian-speaking Moldavians. Because remember, to them, they were Romanians. To the Soviets, they were Moldavians. Also, there was a Soviet claim for Bessarabia, and they saw a Slavic element as a threat for Romania. They didn't trust Slavic elements coming from Soviet Union. They suspected Ukrainians of Bolshevism. They didn't forget two anti-Romanian rebellions in Bessarabia, the frontier zone, in Hotin uprising, and Tatar uprising in 1924, where Ukrainians were part of these events as well. And we know when Russian Empire was collapsing, Ukrainians wanted to create their own state. And this photo shows clear the message. Хай живе вільна Україна. They wanted to create an independent state from Imperial Russia or from Soviet Russia or from Soviet Union. But in Romania, they were afraid of increasing number of Ukrainians in those areas where Ukrainians did already live, which was Bukovina and Bessarabia. Final remarks. Well, I probably will just go over to some preliminary conclusions. Pardon me. What made people to leave? Despair forced them to leave Moldavia or in Soviet Moldavia or Soviet Ukraine. They were looking for any possibilities to escape collectivization and to survive afterwards the Great Soviet Famine. But when famine came, it worsened the situation even more, and it determined people to leave for Romania or for Poland, especially in 1932-33. With some exceptions, most of those who attempt to escape, or indeed managed to escape, were villagers or residents in the villages close to Soviet-Romanian border. Again, villages of Romanian-speaking Moldavians, Ukrainians, Russians, and Bulgarians. Although the proximity with Romania provided equal opportunities to many to escape from Stalin's paradise, not every single refugee was granted asylum. Yet, everyone was subjected to get a red bullet from Soviet bodyguards. What else? As documents show, the refugees' acceptance was restrictive and dependent on domestic factors and geopolitics. Here I'm referring to, pardon me, the case of some Jewish refugees and Ukrainians. Pardon me. In Romania, the escapees were provided with help and assistance, but on the European scale, Romanian officials did not push the problem of famine and atrocities committed by the Soviets on that river due to national security and interest. And Romania wasn't alone, keeping a sort of silence of this problem on international arena. But in fact, some of the politicians and member of governments, they spoke about this, but not to expected extent and in the way that will help the world to know more what was happening in the Soviet Union during Stalin's collectivization and Great Soviet Famine. Last but not least, I found another interesting document, an opinion of a Ukrainian from Bessarabia who was telling the following, who made the following statement later, decades later, about the way he saw Soviet Union taking over Bessarabia and what happened next. I remember, he says, when Bessarabia was liberated from the Romanians in 1940, the people rejoiced and welcomed the Soviets with bread and salt, hoping for a good life. Well, we can see a lot of Soviet Union propaganda, images, photos showing how the Red Army entered Chisinau or Bessarabia or Baltic states, and they were met with flowers and so on. This is the man who was living in those times. And he continues, people in Bessarabia were too tired of stickering Romanian landowners and of the cruel police who were always ready to hit anyone with a baton on the back for nothing, which reveals another reality in those times. And he ends, but people had no idea that some 7 years later, their life under the rule of Royal Romania, compared to their life under the Soviets, would seem the epitome of communism itself, the construction of which was just declared in the USSR, end of quotation. And 7 years later was 1947, 46, 47, with another famine which hit Soviet Ukraine and Soviet Moldavia. Some references of mine here, and this presentation is made based on one of my articles I'm working on. Thank you for your attention, and this is the last photo, which shows happy people, children and adults who managed to escape Soviet Union during the Holodomor in Soviet Ukraine to Romania. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be glad to answer any questions you may have. And once again, thank you, PEC, Hughes, for this support.
Many thanks, Dr. Baidaus, for a talk full of personal stories and wonderful images. And indeed, I wanted to, since I'm going to be chairing the conversation, I'll take the liberty of asking you if you can say a few more words about that final photo and the context. Was there, where did that photo come from? Was there a project to document this and so on? But before I let you answer the question, I just want to remind our audience that we will be having a Q&A where you send your questions to the Q&A section at the bottom center of your screen, and I will field the questions. So, Eduard, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm coughing because I have an allergy. Mm-hmm. And with this COVID, when I'm coughing outside, even with a mask, people are looking at me. I say, no, don't worry, I have just allergy. Well, with this photo and many other photos, they were people documenting those events. And those photos were taken mainly in Chisinau, which was the capital of Bessarabia. And they were published in various newspapers, Romanian ones, first of all, and also in journals. Because what Romanian authorities wanted, they wanted to let the public opinion to be aware of what was happening in Soviet Union. And through such publications, they eventually wanted to spread the word to the rest of the world who read Romanian newspapers and saw Romanian magazines and journals. So this is just one of the examples. And one of the articles I found in 1932 in one of the publications has a lot of images, heartbreaking images with the children, with babies, with wounded women and men, and different stories. They were telling what they went through just to try to escape into Romania, or just to escape from Stalinism. There was a case I found. A person was taken as a kulak. He was sent to Solovetsky Monastery, far away, and he managed to escape from Solovetsky Monastery, which is very interesting how he managed to do so. And then he traveled for the whole Soviet Union, and he reached his own village, and then he escaped to Romania. It's like it's interesting. So just to briefly answer to your question, there are many more such photos which were called to prove the drastic realities which were happening, those events which are happening in Soviet Union, in Soviet Ukraine, on the border with Romania.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think the whole story of the documentation by borderland states is a really important, interesting angle. So we have some questions coming in. The first one is from Frank Sisson, and he asks, Did the policies of the authorities in the Moldovan ASSR differ in any meaningful way from other areas of Ukraine? Did their press deal with Romania and conditions there, and how common were family contacts across the Dnister? How severe were attacks on Romanian nationalism? So there's a cluster of questions that I think are very interesting.
Thank you for the question. Indeed, there is a national question here too, because there were many people who had relatives over the border. And in the time when Soviet authorities start fighting against the Ukrainian nationalism, they did the same thing in Soviet Moldavia too, because if Ukrainian nationalists, according to Soviet propaganda and party decisions, wanted to rip Ukraine away from Soviet Union, the same blame was put on Romanian-speaking intellectuals of Moldavian Autonomous Republic who wanted to rip away Moldavia, Soviet Moldavia, to give it to Romania. So in these terms, there was the same approach to ethnic nationalism. Even more, in 1932, Soviet Union decided, not suddenly, they had a point, to change the script of language spoken in Soviet Moldavia. So they switched it to Latin alphabet from the Cyrillic alphabet. That was one of the differences between Moldavian and Romanian languages, so to say. So they did it to show that even the language, the script is the same, and through the script, through the language, we should get much closer to our brothers in Red Bessarabia and to liberate them. And this policy of indigenizations and Romanization started in 1932 until 1938, and then it stopped because they were afraid they may lose the minds of the Romanian-speaking Moldavians into Romanian culture and mentality. But in terms of policies, collectivization was the same. The only probably difference was in Soviet Moldavia, autonomous one, as in the regions of bordering with Poland, they were more carefully with the people. And there is an indicator I found, collectivization if we speak about Moldavian Autonomous Republic within Ukraine, the higher percentage was in inland Moldavia, or the raions which were far from the border. The collectivization was higher there, but collectivization on the border, in the villages on the border, was very low. About it was 40%, and the authorities were very careful not to provoke those people. And they knew that they had to make this collectivization, but they were very careful not to provoke people to revolt. And they were indeed bred revolts, and not only bred, but just revolts against collectivization. They will get rid of the Soviet power in the village for a few days, or 10 days, and then they will send troops to calm down the spirits of those villagers. So there were many things in common with the rest of collectivization and decolectivization in the rest of Ukraine and Soviet Union, but there was this specific of the border. And for the border villages, they were begging the authorities in Kharkiv first, and then in Kiev, to provide them with more grain and food to maintain the stability in the region, if I did answer your question.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Bogdan Klib, and he's asking, were estimates made of the number of refugees that escaped to Romania for the whole period encompassing both the collectivization and famine years, or for specific periods or years? Did the Romanian authorities or journalists at the time or later scholars collect data on that?
Thank you. It's a very good question, and it's a complicated question to answer, but I will try. So as of today, I found no statistics of how many people crossed the border and were registered as refugees. However, the modern scholarship in the West and in Romania and in Moldova a figure of 20,000 people is used. Now, when I'm looking at these figures, 20,000 people, I don't think 20,000 people crossed the border in 1932, 33. I may assume that it is about the people who crossed the border after 1918 until 1940 or 33. So there is some work to do on that. However, some newspapers in those newspapers published in those times, they speak of 1,000 people crossing the border only in a month. So as to probably the answer might be given to this question after a deep research in Romanian archives, which may relieve some statistic information. There were documents of the Ministry of Interior, documents of so-called Siguranța, which was a secret service, and which were not fully explored. And even though there are some publications in Romanian language and in English language, they did not answer, in my opinion, this question of the precise figure how many people survived. So 20,000, that's a lot, but to me, it's a working hypothesis. It should be worked and demonstrated with more archival documents discovered in the future. And even those documents which I have discovered already, I have a lot. I didn't physically manage to go from all of them.
Yeah, thank you. Yaris Balan says, thank you for a fascinating talk. Are you aware of any foreign European commissions sent to investigate what was happening on the Soviet-Romanian border in 1932-33, as some of the atrocities were reported in the Western press? Sorry.
At this stage of my research, I am not aware of such a commission to be sent, but what I am aware of, those refugees from Soviet Ukrainian Romania, they organize themselves in various associations, in addition to the existing one in Romania. So there was an association of Transnistrian Romanians called, and they sent an appeal to the League of Nations. I have this document, and I don't have yet what did the League of Nations do to respond to this. But what I know also, one of the famous diplomats of Romania in those times, Nicolae Titulescu, he spoke a lot about this atrocity and the problems with the border. I didn't look yet into his files in archives. I just need to go to Romania to work with the documents of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania and other possible files. But as of today, I don't have any information that a special commission or a delegation from League of Nations was sent to Romania to examine it. That this event was reported to the West, it was. In some of the papers, one of the titles of the newspaper's material was called The Red Massacre on the Dniester River. So they knew, but what they did, it's for me, it's hard to say at this moment.
Thank you. If there are any other questions from our audience, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section. I'll take a chance to just follow up. I was thinking along some of the same lines as our other questioners, and I just wanted to follow up on your answer about the 20,000 and it not being clear how many, when those people all crossed. I was thinking about Andrei Shliachter's work on Soviet borders and smuggling and the sort of the porous nature of the borders in the West in the 1920s and early 1930s. Do you have a sense of the broader picture of that border, of that river as a border before collectivization? And were there a lot of was there a lot of smuggling across that border? Were there networks already established that you see people feeding into? Did Soviet the Soviet state is sort of in crisis in this period, but was it able to up its game on the border at the time of collectivization? Can you just tell us a little bit about that broader context?
I'll try. I remember well his presentation, Dr. Pardon me. Yeah. Last year I attended it, and he was speaking about smuggling into Poland and crossing the border in the 20s and 30s. Excellent presentation. And it's the same border. I mean, western border of Soviet Union, eastern border of Poland and Romania. And indeed, even before collectivization, even before the famine, there were a lot of border incidents and provocations. Soviet, in terms of geopolitics, to speak about this a little bit, Soviets tried to provoke Romanians. They will send agents just to not only to spread the word of communism, so to say, but they had provocators and they had partisans of Soviet power in Bessarabia, because Bessarabia was a part of, as I said, a part of Russian Empire, and this revolutionary movement did not disappear overnight. And even more, when the land was promised and given to peasants in former Russian Empire, Bessarabia at the time was part of Russian Empire. And peasants who had less land, they knew about Lenin and they were expecting to get the land. And now the situation has been changed radically, because the Russian Empire collapsed, new Russia was generated, appeared, and there was an independent Ukraine, and here you come, Bessarabia, part of Romania. So where is the land? Lenin promised us, and we get rid of the Tsar, right? And we got a king, a monarchy. So what they did, Romanian authorities, starting with 1918 and until 1921, they implemented an agrarian reform within all over Romania, including Bessarabia, and they provided land to peasants just to solve the problem. But that wasn't enough, because those people who were living in Bessarabia and had connections with Soviet Union, they did exist. Even the leaders of the Soviet Autonomous Republic, many of them were people who were born in Bessarabia. I will give just one example. One of the best known commander of Red Army, Kotovsky, who died in unclear circumstances in 1926. So in terms of, and there were also, of course, spies, as Soviet Union claimed, sent by Romania into, sent by Romanians into Soviet Union, probably for intelligence, to gather intelligence information and so on. But I am thinking, if Romanian authorities were so were ready to challenge Soviet Union, to provoke Soviet Union. Romania was a small country, and you don't play a game with such a large country as Soviet Union, who wanted us actually to take over your land. Now about smuggling. Smuggling over the Dnister existed as soon as the Dnister became a border between East and West. Initially, that was a border of Ukrainian People's Republic, and it was one situation. But then when it was Soviet Ukraine and Soviet Union, it became a real border, and people indeed tried to smuggle the things over the border from both sides. I didn't work on this specific aspect of the problem, but there were networks, people who would receive the goods and who will exchange the goods from one side to another side. I thank you for this question. It's probably a question to look into this later on, but my focus was mainly early 1930s, well, starting with 1929 and until 1934, 35. But smuggling did exist always between Romania and smugglers between Romania and Soviet Union.
Thank you. Yeah, I just thought that those would be networks that could facilitate this kind of flight. So I was just curious. We have another question, a small one, a big question, small, short. Has the Romanian government recognized the Holodomor as a genocide?
Bingo. I haven't looked at this. To be honest, I screened the list of the countries which recognized genocide, Holodomor as genocide. I'm afraid to say that they did. I just don't remember at this moment. I expect that they did so. I expect, but I need to look once again to that list, which is available on internet, to make sure that I'm not saying something wrong about Romania or Moldova.
Well, as my grandfather would say, we'll forgive you, though others wouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just coming to the end of our time. If are there any final quick questions? Marta Bazuk asks, where do you see your research going?
Forward. I think after I'm working on a number of papers, but I think I will end up with a monograph on this topic. I think I have sufficient sources here in Canada, because I collected documents long before I was awarded this great postdoc. But I will probably need to have some other field research trips to Romania and Moldova to work to collect more materials from my articles and book. And also I was considering, and I spoke with my advisor in my program, to work on a collection of documents related to Holodomor in Ukraine and the reaction of Romania to this tragic event of 20th century.
Sounds like a wonderful set of projects. Well, we're at the end of our time, so I want to thank Eduard for a really fascinating talk, and to our audience members for excellent questions. And we're all very much looking forward to seeing how your work unfolds, and to the planned projects connected with it. So unless there's anything else to say, I think we will thank everyone for coming, and please watch for further talks that will be organized by HREC and by CIUS more generally. So have a good afternoon, everyone, and all the best for the holiday weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.